How's it going, everyone? My name is Dieugirl, and welcome back to Book 2, Tina's Tale. Last time we left off, Tristina had discovered that she had a twin sister named Tinessa, which was later shortened to Tina. Now, the two have, along with Besh, Harry, Ron, and Hermione, have returned to Hogwarts and beginning their magical education once again. So let's do it to it. Part 2. The Howler. Warning. One instance of swearing in English. The worst came when Errol delivered a blood-red envelope at lunch the next day. Ron was staring at it as if it was a bomb, and Tristina folded her ears down. Besh clapped his hands over his sensitive ears, grimacing. Tina looked at the object curiously, turning her head. "What that?" she asked, using the little English she knew. "A howler. Very noisy thing," said Tiffany, frowning. Ron opened it, and Mrs. Weasley's voice erupted through the great hall. "Ronald Weasley!" Ron gulped and looked at Tristina as if to say, "Now I know how you felt." "How dare you steal that car! I am absolutely disgusted! Your father's facing inquiry at work, and it's entirely your fault! It's lucky that you and Harry are still alive!" Harry's slack face went blank, and he sank below the table, until only his scar showed. Tiffany frowned at him, a small pang of pity erupting inside her. Tina was huddled against her, sobbing. Apparently, the howler had frightened her to the point of tears. "If you put another toe out of line, we'll bring you straight home!" The letter then turned to Tristina, Tinessa, and Ginny. "Oh, and Ginny, dear, congratulations on making Gryffindor. Your father and I are so proud." With that, the letter crumbled into ashes and ignited. Tinessa whimpered and held her sister, her frightened eyes still on the howler. Besh appeared to be uncomfortable with the whole ordeal. Ron peered up from under the table, and Harry and Hermione could only look at him. Ron then cleared his throat, took out some spellotape, and attempted to fix his broken wand. The next day, the students filed into Gilderoy Lockhart's classroom, talking excitedly. "Allow me to introduce you to your new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher," said Professor Lockhart, stepping dramatically onto the platform. "Me," he said, smiling. Hermione and Susan Bones smiled dreamily, while Tristina simply gave Tinessa and Besh a look. Clearly she thought their new professor belonged in a nut house. Besh quite agreed. "Be warned," said Professor Lockhart, taking out his wand dramatically. "It is my job to arm you against the foulest things on this earth. Note that no harm can befall you whilst I am here." He then stopped by a cage which was rattling violently. Tinessa whimpered and hid behind her sister. "I ask you not to scream. It might—" The cover was pulled over, and from what Tristina could make out, it looked like the cage was filled with squirming blue fairies. "Provoke them!" shouted Gilderoy Lockhart, as the creatures swarmed about. "Cornish pixies!" laughed Seamus. "Freshly caught Cornish pixies," said Professor Lockhart. "Laugh if you want, Mr. Finnegan, but there can be devilishly tricky little blighters," he added, noticing that most of the class was smirking and chuckling to each other. Tinessa peered out and noticed she was in no danger. "Does this guy really know what he's doing?" she asked curiously. "I'm starting to wonder that myself, sis," replied Tristina, arching one eyebrow. "You two aren't the only ones, trust me," Besh added. "Let's see what you make of them now!" shouted Professor Lockhart, opening the cage.
The pixies flooded the classroom, and students raced from their seats, screaming. Tristina pulled her sister to the ground and covered both of their heads as pixies swarmed over them.
Ah! Tiffany, help!
Tanessa cried. Tristina looked up to see one pixie lifting Tanessa into the air, while another one hoisted up Neville.
Hang on, sis!
Tristina shouted, following their flight across the room. Vaulting over a desk, Tristina took out her wand and pointed it at a pixie. Flipendo! She shouted, and a blue jet of light shot from her wand and hit the pixie. Tanessa screamed as she began to fall towards the floor. Tristina raced to catch her. Hermione pointed her wand at the rest of the pixies and shouted, Immobilis! Freezing the pixies in midair. She then leapt aside as Tristina leapt into the air, caught Tanessa in her arms, twisted her body over, and landed on her back. Tristina winced as her body slammed into the hardwood floor of the classroom and skidded to a stop.
Tiffany! Tina!
Hermione cried, rushing towards the two. Tristina felt Tanessa get up, shaking, then felt someone grab her from behind and lift her to her feet. There, now, dear, up you get, Professor Lockhart's voice said.
You okay, sis?
Tristina asked, checking her sister over. Tanessa nodded. Then the 5 students left the classroom. Come on, Tiff, Besh, said Harry, racing ahead. We got Quidditch practice. Besh had, in the meantime, gotten Neville down from the immobilized pixies and had set him safely on the ground. At the mention of Quidditch practice, however, he was instantly off after Tiff and Harry, eager to finally be able to get back on his broom. Something told him Harry and Tiff felt the same way. I spent the whole summer devising a new game plan, said Oliver Wood as he, Harry, Besh, and Tiffany walked out to the Quidditch pitch. This year we're going to train longer and harder. Oh, I don't believe it. Tiffany, Harry, and Besh looked ahead. Marcus Flint, captain of the Slytherin Quidditch team, was marching towards them as if he were leading troops to battle. Where do you think you're going, Flint? Wood called as the 2 teams converged on the lawns. Quidditch practice, said Flint, smiling so wide that Tristina could count every single one of his broken teeth. I booked the field for Gryffindor today, said Wood impatiently. Tristina looked over and saw Tanessa, Ron, and Hermione rushing towards them. I've got a note, said Flint, handing Wood a scroll as the trio arrived. Wood opened the scroll and read what was obviously Professor Snape's handwriting. I hereby book the Quidditch pitch in order that the Slytherin team can train their new Seeker, Wood read. Sighing, he let the scroll spring closed in his hand. You've got a new Seeker. Who? Asked Wood. The Slytherin team and a boy about Harry's height, with slick blonde hair and a smug face, emerged. Malfoy? Harry gasped. Tiffany felt Besh tense up beside her and realized she had done so as well. Her ears folded back against her head and both of them raised their hackles in a snarl. Tiffany felt her quills emerge and the hand begin to spark. Yeah, and that's not all that's new this year, Malfoy said smugly, tossing his broom from one hand to the other. Those are Nimbus 2001s. How'd you get those? Gasped Ron. A gift from Draco's father, said Flint smugly. You see, Weasley, my father can afford the best. Ron's face turned a violent shade of puce. At least no one on the Gryffindor team had to buy their way in, Hermione interjected. They got in on pure talent, she continued smugly. Hear, hear, called Tiffany and Besh, raising their own brooms. No one asked your opinion, you filthy little mudblood. Draco spat. Tiffany and Tina let out a loud of anger. Angelina shouted, How dare you! And Harry just looked politely puzzled. You'll pay for that one, Malfoy, snarled Ron, pulling out his wand. Eat slugs! As he attempted to cast the spell on Malfoy, the spell came out the wrong end of his wand and sent him flying backwards. Run! Tristina cried, rushing towards him. Malfoy was bent down double on his broom, pounding his fists on the ground with laughter. Ron rolled over and spit out a slug. Let's get him to Hagrid's, Harry told Hermione, picking up one of Ron's arms. Tristina and Tanissa followed behind. As the two passed Malfoy, both spit in his face. Malfoy stopped laughing and went for the two, but Tanissa punched him back, sending him sprawling on the ground.
Miga nala quista!
She shouted, smirking. Tristina tugged on her sister's arm, and the two hurried to follow Harry, Ron, and Hermione towards Hagrid's hut. Besh, surprisingly, had a reaction that was much less violent than Tiff's, Tina's, Angela's, and most definitely Ron's. He simply bared his fangs at Malfoy, who seemed for once not to care that Besh was an imminent threat and was less than 5 feet from him, a distance Besh could easily cross in a millisecond as a panther, puma, wildcat, lion, or tiger. Moonbeam seems to think I won't hurt him, Besh observed in a detached sort of way. He helped Tiff get Ron to Hagrid's, passing by Malfoy as he did so, who was still doubled over with laughter. Besh's eyes narrowed, and his foot flashed out just as Malfoy straightened again, making him double over again, this time in pain. Besh smirked. Let that be a lesson, Moonbeam. I don't give a flying rat's arse how rich you are. You insult my friends, you deal with me. I don't pull any punches. Leaving it at that, Besh continued walking with Tiff and Ron towards Hagrid's, Harry, Hermione, and Tina following. Hagrid saw them coming and opened the door, frowning at Ron's belching. Time for a specialist's equipment, he said, placing a large basin in front of Ron, saying, Best way to do it's get them all out, Ronald, he said, frowning again as Ron lurched forward and belched another slug into the basin. That's quite a spell you used, Ron, Hagrid observed as Ron belched yet another slug. What was the occasion, and who was it for? Malfoy, that slug, Besh said contemptuously, and Hagrid couldn't help but chuckle at Besh's choice of adjective. He called Hermione he growled and couldn't finish. Hermione herself stepped forward instead and said, He called me a mudblood. He did not, Hagrid said, shocked. What's a mudblood? Harry asked. Apparently, he didn't know what it meant to call someone that. Besh didn't blame him. Having been raised by muggles, Harry was bound not to recognize some of the more foul wizard insults. It means dirty blood, Hermione said, pacing, near tears. It's a really foul name to call someone with no magical bloodline, someone born of non-magic parents. Someone like me. She paused and looked down. It's not normally a word used in polite conversation. Harry still looked confused, so Besh supplied. Harry, the Malfoys are a part of a crowd who think they're better than everyone else because they're what we call pure blood. It's okay, Hermione, Tina said. She couldn't know what was being said, but she could sense Hermione's pain and sadness. Malfoy bad, she continued. Call you bad name. Malfoy hurt Hermione. Malfoy stupid. Tanissa's right, Hermione. Harry's mum, an extremely powerful witch, was Muggle-born, and there's not a spell in the world that you can't do. Don't you think on it, Hermione. Don't you think on it for 1 minute, Hagrid said firmly. Hermione nodded and gave a tiny smile. Hermione happy now? Tina asked hopefully, and Hermione practically attacked her in a fierce hug as a way of response. Besh smirked and said, I think she's fine now, Tina. Tina get Malfoy, she said proudly. Tina call Malfoy bad thing now. Tiff simply smiled and ruffled Tina's hair. By the way, Hermione added, what does miga nala quista mean? Tiff and Tina promptly replied by covering her mouth with one hand. Shh! Bad words, Tina said. Basically, it's an insult to someone's family, Tiff elaborated. It means, in effect, that one's family eats shit. She stopped as Besh let out a deep, tigerish growl. I'll murder Moonbeam one of these days, I swear it, he said angrily. I don't even want to know where he learned an insult like that, and a Keeson one no less. Harry, who happened to check his watch, shouted, Tiff! Besh! Tiff! We've got to be at the Quidditch pitch in 30 minutes! Let's go! Soon, Tiffany sat in her position near Fred, her tail wrapped in a mock beater's club. When the quaffle was tossed in the air, she saw Besh go after it amongst the other chasers. Tiffany shot into the air and spied a bludger heading towards Harry. She raised her tail and gave it a mighty whack, sending it coursing in the other direction. Suddenly, the bludger stopped dead, shivered, then went right back at Harry. Tiffany raised her tail again and whacked it, but the bludger simply made another U-turn for Harry. Harry leaned on his broom handle, urging his Nimbus 2000 to go faster. He could hear the telltale whistle of the bludger directly behind him. Someone's tampered with this bludger, Tiffany grunted, swinging her tail at the bludger once again. While Tiffany protected Harry, Fred signaled to Wood for a timeout. The only way I'm going to catch the snitch is if it flies up my sleeve, said Harry exasperatedly. This is your fault, Wood. Get the snitch or die trying, Fred growled to his captain. Wood ignored Fred, and Tiffany stared at the ground. All right, you heard him. Tiffany, Fred, resume your duties with the rest of the team, and let Harry deal with the renegade bludger. Tiffany's eyes widened at the word renegade. The Quessa gave a groan and held her head. Begenstroth? Wood asked as she grabbed onto Besh for support. I'm okay, Oliver, said Tiffany, shaking her head to clear it. I'm fine, she said, more clearly, releasing Besh and straightening up. Wood nodded, then looked up as Madame Hooch approached them. Ready to resume play? She asked. Wood nodded, and the group took off. Tiff! Wood called. Only block Harry if the situation calls for it. Tiffany nodded and gave a whack to a bludger that was about to stop Angelina from scoring. A few more minutes into the game, Tiffany spotted the non-stubborn bludger make a turn for Harry as well. Snarling, Tiffany whacked the second bludger away from Harry. The first bludger slammed into Tiffany's chest and, knocking her off her broom, sent her hurtling towards the ground. The last thing she knew was someone yelling, Wingardium Leviosa! Then a pain erupted as the bludger struck her in the head. That fall must have been 50 feet. We thought it was just after Potter, but then it went after Tiff. Besh just rolled his eyes as he waited for Tiff to come to. He had taken it upon himself to blow the bludger permanently out of the sky after Tiff had been saved. The bludger hadn't stopped at her ribs and head, and it was getting ready to come down on her yet again while she was on the ground unconscious. Besh had put a stop to that, though. As the bludger had come down, he dived on his broom, plummeting like a rock. When he came level with the bludger, he jumped off his broom and gave the bludger a roundhouse kick in midair. It had zoomed off course, and Besh pulled out his wand and incinerated the thing as it made yet another U-turn. Pulling himself out of his thoughts, he heard a voice say, Hey, I know Harry's the Seeker, but what am I? Chopped liver? He gasped and turned his head to look at Tiff, who was wide awake. He lightly hugged her, not wanting to hurt her ribs anymore, and said, I'm so glad you're awake. I blew up that bludger for you. He continued with a wink and a grin. Just then, Madame Pomfrey came bustling through the room, saying, Out of my way! Out of my way! All the students, save for Besh and Tina, left, and Madame Pomfrey looked at them and said to Harry and Tiff, You've got yourself some good friends. You're both in for a rough night. She gave Harry some clear liquid she'd poured out of a bottle labeled Skelegro. He took the glass and drank it, and coughed violently while making a disgusted face. What did you expect, pumpkin juice? Madame Pomfrey asked, exasperatedly. You should have been brought straight to me. I can mend bones in a heartbeat, but growing them back is a far nastier job. With that, she moved to Tiff's bed and said, I'm sorry, Miss Fegenstorth, but you'll have to take some as well. I've only got experience in mending human bones. Unfortunately, Quesson bones are out of my range of expertise. There's a difference? Besh asked. more to keep Madame Pomfrey talking than anything. "Yes, Mr. Tychos, there most certainly is. Crescent bones are far thicker than human bones. Had that bludger hit Mr. Potter here the same speed it hit Miss Wagensworth, Mr. Potter would have needed to go to St. Mungo's for a full ribcage replacement. All it did to Miss Wagensworth was break 5 of the 6 bones in her ribcage." "I think I'll learn about crescent anatomy so that Tiff won't have to drink Skilligrew," Besh thought, as Tiff drank the stuff and had a reaction similar to Harry's, except her expression of disgust was far more apparent. "My goodness, I know it's not the best tasting stuff in the world, but it's far better than having 5 broken ribs and a boneless arm," Madame Pomfrey cried as she bustled off. "What's it taste like?" Tina asked. "I don't think either of us want to know, Tina," Besh replied, and Tiff nodded her head in agreement. "Hey, Harry," Besh continued, "I missed what happened after the bludger hit Tiff. Care to fill us in?" "Well," said Harry, sitting up slightly, "the bludger continued to chase after me. After I got a bit of a break from it, I spotted the snitch near Malfoy's ear and went after it. I caught it, but not before the bludger slammed into my arm and broke it. Professor Lockhart tried to mend my bones, but instead made it so I had no bones left in my arm." Tristina grimaced. "So we won?" she asked, smiling slightly. "Yeah," said Harry, laying gingerly down on his bed. "We won." "But Harry," said Tristina, as she laid her head down on the pillow, "who made that bludger chase after you?" Harry shook his head, and Besh cut in. "I dunno, Tiff," Besh said, shrugging. "But I'm going to kill them once my bones grow back," Harry growled. Besh smirked and said, "And I'll be right behind you." He watched Tristina sigh, wincing his pain as the Skilligrew began to work on her ribs, and laid back down. As she drifted off into a deep sleep, Besh pecked her forehead and said, "Heal soon, Tiff." He turned to Harry, who was also on the verge of sleep, and said, "You two, Harry, how are we supposed to win any Quidditch games if our seeker and best beater are out of commission?" Harry gave a feeble smile in response, and lay down, asleep the second his head hit the pillow. "I think I need to have a talk with Professor Lockhart," Besh said to Tina as they left the hospital wing to let the 2 injured second years get their rest. He and Tina walked to his classroom, and walked in to find him answering piles upon piles of letters. "Hey, Professor Lockhart," Besh said pleasantly, barely managing to hide his growl. The professor looked up and gave them a flashing smile, and said, "Hello, dear children. How are your friends?" Besh growled then, and said, "Well, thanks to you, Harry has to stay in the hospital wing overnight. You know, we could have just taken him to Madame Pomfrey. She can mend broken bones. She's qualified to do that, unlike you." Professor Lockhart started to interrupt, but Besh snarled, "No! I'm not done. I'm going to tell you what, Professor. You do what you came here to do. Teach defense against the dark arts. If you ever point your wand at one of my friends again, I will have you tried for improper use of magic. See if your Order of Merlin 3rd class can get you out of that. Or maybe if you can get the abandoned Banshee to bail you out. Or maybe just dazzle the judges into letting you off with one of your brilliant smiles." Besh scoffed. "You know what I see you as, Mr. Lockhart? I see a man with an ego far too big for his own good, an amount of self-control far too little for his own good. Practice some restraint, or I won't either." "Young sir, are you threatening me? You cannot threaten a professor," Lockhart said indignantly. "Oh, but I already have," Besh replied in a deadly voice, "and unless you want me to follow through on what I've said, you'll heed my advice. Don't go near Tristina Wagensworth Hermione Granger, Tennessa Wegenstroth, or Ronald Weasley.
You no go near Harry,
Tina supplied, baring her own fangs. Lockhart gulped, then sneered and said, You two can't do anything against me. Have you once read any of my books? You wouldn't stand a chance. Don't bet on it, Gilderoy, Besh said dismissively, and he and Tina walked out of Lockhart's classroom, Besh sporting a smirk a mile wide on his face.
Besh, why did we do that? Won't we get in trouble?
Tina asked him, although she couldn't exactly hide the smirk on her own face. Besh shrugged. It made me feel better. Lockhart's ego would be far too wounded to tell the other professors he was threatened by two 12-year-olds. We're fine. Now, we have to go think of something to do to pass the time until Harry and your sister are healed. Your bludger? You made that bludger chase after me? Tiffany winced and slowly opened her eyes. Stars twinkled through the windows, and a dull glow came from a candle lit near Madame Pomfrey's office. Wincing at the pain in her still mending ribs, Tiffany gingerly sat up and looked over at Harry's bed. Standing on the edge of Harry's bed was a house elf dressed in ragged pillowcase. Tiffany had seen house elves in the proper parts of Wegenstroth Manor, the parts slaves weren't allowed to go into, like the parlor, the living room, and the recreation room. Harry? Tiffany asked, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. What's the matter? She asked, yawning.
The Quessa knows Harry Potter?
The elf asked, turning his tennis ball-sized eyes towards Harry. Yeah, she's one of my best friends. Her name is Tiffany, said Harry, looking sideways at Tiffany, who shook her head as Harry started to say her proper name. She didn't know if she could trust Dobby just yet. Anyway, said Harry, getting Dobby back on the subject. About that bludger.
Yes, sir. Dobby made the bludger chase after Harry Potter. Dobby only wanted Harry Potter hurt enough to be sent home.
You better clear off before me and Tiffany's bones grow back, Dobby, or we're gonna strangle you, Harry growled. Harry, Tristina started, defensively. Do you realize what Dobby has put me through? He stopped the barrier from letting Ron and me through to platform 9 3/4. He almost got me expelled from Hogwarts. Tiffany put her hand over Harry's mouth and looked down the hall to Madame Pomfrey's quarters.
Dobby is used to death threats, ma'am.
Tiffany removed her hand from Harry's mouth and looked at Dobby.
Dobby gets them 5 times a day at home.
So do I, but I don't try to kill the people who are trying to help me, Tiffany argued, now in Harry's defense. I don't suppose you could tell us why you're trying to kill us? Tiffany asked, snarling.
Not kill you, Miss Tiffany. Never kill you or Mr. Harry Potter. Dobby only wants Miss Tiffany and Harry Potter safe now that history is about to repeat itself.
Repeat itself? Tiffany asked. How? The other day, me, Ron, and Hermione were going back to the common room when we found Mrs. Norris stiff as a board, hanging by her tail from one of the torch holders. Above her was a message written in blood. It said, "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware." Harry explained. It was written in blood, he added as a grim afterthought. I think this has happened before. I don't know who did it, but I think I know who... Harry turned to see Dobby had vanished. Shadows began appearing on the floor outside the hospital wing. Harry quickly laid down, and Tiffany closed her eyes, her sharp ears listening hard.
Put him over here,
said Professor McGonagall. More footsteps shuffled nearby.
What happened?
Asked Madame Pomfrey, hurrying past Tiffany and Harry's beds towards them. There's been another attack, said Dumbledore, his voice as though he were lifting something heavy and setting it down. Do you think he's been petrified, Madame Pomfrey? Professor McGonagall whispered. Dumbledore found him when he was going down to get a cup of hot cocoa, Professor McGonagall added, her voice shifting as if she were leaning over something. There was silence, a soft grunt, then Professor McGonagall's voice came again. "Do you think he managed to get a picture of his attacker?" A click was heard, and the smell of acid and burnt film reached both Harry and Tiffany. "What does this mean, Albus?" Professor McGonagall asked. "It means that our students are no longer safe," said Professor Dumbledore. "It is as we feared, Minerva." "What should I tell the staff?" "The truth. Tell them the Chamber of Secrets has indeed been opened again." "Again? You mean the chamber's been opened before?" Hermione asked Besh as he walked into the abandoned girls' bathroom with Tiff and Harry in tow, and told Hermione what Tiff and Harry had told him about Dobby's visit last night and Colin. Hermione had sent Besh to get the other 2 second years so that she could tell them what she was planning. "That would appear to be the case," Besh replied. "In any case, now that we know this has happened before, we need to find out who could have opened the chamber." Hermione nodded as she continued mixing the ingredients for, Besh had told Tiff and Harry, a potion called the Polyjuice Potion. The potion would allow Tiffany, Harry, Ron, and Hermione, Besh and Tina would stay behind in case anything went wrong while the other 4 were gone, to transform into Pansy Parkinson, Gregory Goyle, Vincent Crabbe, and Millicent Bulstrode, respectively. It wasn't nearly finished, but it would be within the next month. "Well," Ron said, "don't you see? It had to be Lucius Malfoy who opened the chamber last time while he was in school. Now he's taught dear old Draco how to do it." Besh shook his head. "Ron, according to some reading I've done, just by chance, the chamber was opened 50 years ago last. Draco's only 12, and his father's in his mid-30s. The timelines don't add up." Ron made to open his mouth, but Besh continued. "Now, it's more than likely, however, that Malfoy knows who did do it. Or maybe the textbook I read lied and Lucius really did open the Chamber of Secrets. Either way, this Polyjuice Potion is the best way to find out. No Slytherin would talk to us anyway." Ron opened his mouth again, but this time turned to Hermione and said, "Enlighten me, would you? Why are we brewing this potion of all potions in broad daylight in the middle of a girl's bathroom? Don't you think we'll get caught?" "Yen," Tinissa replied for Hermione, shaking her head as she did so. "Tina, how did you know what Ron said? Are you that much better at English than we thought?" Besh asked curiously. Tinissa simply shrugged and replied, "I recognize Ron's questioning tone, and I can understand the word caught." "No one ever comes in here," Tiff said, smirking to her sister and Hermione. "Why's that, Tiff?" "Moaning Myrtle," Tristina and Tinissa said in perfect unison, looking behind Ron as a small girl with thick glasses floated up out of a toilet and peered out from a stall. "Who?" Ron asked, puzzled. "Moaning Myrtle," Hermione said, nodding to the ghost. Ron didn't understand the gesture and said, "Who's Moaning Myrtle?" "I'm Moaning Myrtle," the ghost said suddenly, getting within 3 inches of Ron's face. Tiff, Tina, Besh, Harry, Ron, and Hermione all watched as she floated past them to hover above the sinks. "I wouldn't expect you to know me," she said in a choked voice. "Who else would want to talk about miserable, moaning Myrtle?" she asked before letting out a wailing scream and shooting past the 6 second years to dive headfirst into a toilet. "She's a little sensitive," Hermione said, and Harry and Ron turned to look at her aghast. "They look like they've seen a ghost," Tinissa muttered. Besh and Tiff managed to turn their sniggers into very convincing coughs. "Something funny?" Ron demanded of the 3 Anthros. "No, Ron, nothing at all," Besh said, making a straight face with some effort. "Just a bit of dust that got caught in our throats, I guess. It happens sometimes." Before the 6 friends realized it, Christmas had come once again to Hogwarts. Harry, Ron, Hermione, Besh, Tiffany, and Tina all signed up to stay over the holidays. They were also delighted to find that Malfoy, Parkinson, Crabbe, and Goyle did as well. "Great," whispered Hermione one day at lunch. "We can interrogate Malfoy over Christmas." Christmas Day turned out to be very exciting right from the moment the twins awoke. "Master Takama!" Tiffany shrieked after she and Tina had come down from the girls' dormitories. Their presents fell from the twins' arms in shock. Several of the girls in the dormitory heard the scream, rushed down, and also screamed and huddled against a corner. Hermione's face was pale. Besh, Harry, and Ron also jogged down the stairs and stopped short of the dark wizard sitting in their common room. "How did Lord Takama get in?" Harry whispered to Besh. Besh just shook his head. His eyes traveled to Tiffany. Tiffany was standing protectively in front of Tina, her wand in her hand, but also shaking with fright. Tina was huddled behind her sister, trembling even worse than Tiffany. "Naga! Master Takama! Naga!" the Quessa sobbed, trying to crouch as low as she could behind her sister. Tiffany's heart had leapt into her throat. What was Takama doing in Gryffindor Tower on Christmas Day? Was he perhaps going to take them back to the slave camp? Why wasn't he moving? "Tiffany, why isn't Dad doing anything?" Tina asked her sister, straightening up slightly as the shock wore down. "I don't know," Tiffany answered in English, shaking her head. Giving a frightened glance at Besh, Tiffany gingerly took one step forward. "Master?" Tiffany asked, slowly, carefully approaching the tyrant. Besh made to stop Tiffany, but Tiffany held up her hand. "Master Takama?" Tiffany tried again, a bit louder this time, taking another tentative step forward. Takama still did not move. Besh's breathing was tense, his hand tightening on his wand. "Yin!" Tina yelped, holding her back. Nearly everyone jumped at the sound of Tina's yell, including Tiffany. Tiffany shook her sister off, then nodded to Besh. Tina nodded fearfully and hurried off to hide behind Besh, Harry, and Ron. "Sir? Is something wrong?" Tiffany asked, a bit louder this time. Takama still did not move. Tiffany quickly gave a questioning look at Besh, and then turned back to her master. Had something happened to Takama overnight? "Why is he just sitting there?" asked Ron, stepping forward curiously. Besh and Harry did the same. "Is he dead?" asked Hermione. Tiffany shakily stretched out her branded hand and placed it gently on Takama's shoulder. "Master," she said, shaking him slightly. Suddenly, Takama sprang to life and grabbed his daughter by her shoulders. "Gotcha!" he snarled, grinning. Tiffany let out a shriek and pulled one hand back, forming a ball of Kai. She then threw it forward, blasting Takama in the face. The tyrant fell head over heels over the couch as Tiffany ran back to Besh. Turning, Tiffany shakily formed two more balls of Kai, while Besh held out his wand, both ready to strike. Takama stood shakily, and Besh began preparing to attack him again. Before he could, though, Takama held up his hands, which looked oddly young to belong to a man of Takama's age, and said, Okay, we surrender." Besh lowered his wand to watch Tiff, who'd walked up to Takama, and reached down, grabbing his hair. "Tiffany Yin!" Tina cried as Tiffany did so, running forward to drag her backwards. When she did, Takama's face and hair melted off and became a gob of crystal-clear goo in Tiffany's hands. Fred Weasley unbuttoned the long cloak halfway down, and George Weasley unbuttoned the rest. No one except Tina knew exactly what was said, as Besh and Tiff began beating the twins from every angle, as Tiff's swears were all in Keeson, and Besh's were all in Animalese, so it sounded like a bunch of roars and growls, intermingling with Tiff's cries until it created one huge mess of noise. Finally, Tiff gave one last punch to George's arm, and Besh kicked Fred's leg out from under him, making Fred fall to the ground, clutching the back of his leg. That having been done, Besh returned his attention to the clear goo Tiff had in her hand again and asked the twins, "What is that, anyway?" "Weasley's morphing masks. Fred and I invented them," George said quickly, as though he were afraid Besh might start hitting them again. Truth be told, Besh was debating resuming hitting them himself. He motioned for George to continue. "Basically, all you do is put it on and look at the person you're trying to scare. The mask will then transform into the thing that scares that person the most. First we thought of Harry, but since we figured what he would have been scared of would have scared everyone else." There was another thud heard, this time because of Harry punching George's arm. "We decided to use you and Tanessa as our guinea pigs," Fred finished, smiling. Besh sighed as Tiff collapsed on one of the couches. He then said to the twins, "You know, it's an impressive bit of magic, I'll give you that, but you might want to be more careful before you two become human pincushions." He gestured to Tiff's tail as he said this, and the twins could see that Tiff's quills were still fully extended. "Okay. Sorry, Tiff," the twins said, sounding truly repentant. Besh growled and said, "And if you're going to do that to them, make sure I'm not around. Otherwise you'll be a pair of shredded human pincushions. Merlin, that nearly stopped my heart in its tracks. That Takama could have been here." He sighed and shook his head as Tina went back and brought down both the Quessa's presents, as Tiff was still rather shaken by seeing Takama. "Lika! Lika! Papa!" Tina said, pointing to the smallest of gifts. Tiff went over and picked up a note, and Besh walked over and read it over her shoulder. The note said in neat, elegant handwriting, "Received your letter. Hope to see you soon. Master Takama." Suddenly both Quessas yelped and dropped their presents, and Besh could see the brands on both of their hands had turned blood red. Besh took Tiff's hands, massaging it lightly, wincing and simply for the Quessa. As he moved on to Tina's hand, Ron asked, "What'd he give you?" "Paolo Baku," Tina said, and Tiff translated. "Payback," she said. "He's still upset that you took us from Wegenstroth Manor," Tina said, and Besh translated this time. Ron looked guiltily to friend George and muttered, "Sorry." "It's fine, Ron. They probably wouldn't have gotten out of there if we hadn't gone, and something tells me this is light coming from Takama," Besh said, as the two Quessa picked up the coins and promptly cried out again. "I think he cursed them to make your scars burn any time you touch them," Hermione said, examining the coins after Besh had snatched them from Tiff and Tina. Harry then took the coins and threw them into the fire. "What a nice present Takama sent you," he said sarcastically as Besh watched the coins flash bright red, then burn in the fireplace, and smirked at Harry's remark. "Isn't it just so wonderful to see he's such a considerate being? Don't you wish there were more people like Takama in the world?" Besh asked, and Harry snorted and nodded. Then Harry said, "Hey, in any case, I'm hungry. Who's up for breakfast?" The other 7 people in the common room all raised their hands, and the 8 of them went down to the great hall for Christmas breakfast. That evening at dinner, Tiffany and Tina shared a wizard cracker, which turned out to be a large silver-furred bonnet. Tina took it and put it on her head, then began to sing "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," which had Tiffany in a fit of giggles. She was just calming down as Hermione brought her plate over to them. "Everything's set," she whispered. "All we need now is a bit of who you're changing into." Tiffany looked nervously at Tina. Neither twin had seen Pansy Parkinson all day. "Crab and Goyle," said Harry, nodding. "Oh, and don't worry, Tiffany," said Hermione, pulling out 2 vials. She handed one labeled Pansy to Tiffany. "I got this off Pansy's robes," she explained, as Tiffany took the vial. "Now, once you knock out Crab and Goyle, hide them in the broomstick room, and pull out a few of their hairs, and put on their robes." "Whose hair are you ripping out, then?" Harry asked Ron. "I've already got mine. Millicent Bulstrode, Slytherin," she said, grimacing. "I filled these with a simple sleeping draught. Simple, but powerful, said Hermione, putting 2 miniature muffin cakes on the table. I'm going to check on the Polyjuice Potion. Tiff and Tina will be the bait. Harry, Ron, you two make sure Crabbe and Goyle find these. Hermione finished, holding up the 2 cakes. Tiffany sighed and looked at Tina and Besh. This'll be like poking Takama in the eye, Tiffany whispered, frowning. Later, Harry and Ron hid behind the statue of a wizard holding up Hogwarts in one hand and a staff in the other. Ron held up his spellotape wand and started to clear his throat. Ron, said Harry, putting his hand just above Ron's wand. Maybe I should do it, Harry suggested. Oh, right, Ron groaned, and sheathed his wand. Harry took out his own wand and whispered, Wingardium Leviosa! Slowly, the 2 cakes floated into the air. Harry then pulled Ron behind the statue as running footsteps were heard. Tristina and Tanessa raced past, giggling and panting for breath, several little cakes clutched in their bony fists. Back here! Back here! Harry whispered, motioning behind the statue. Tristina and Tanessa ducked behind the statue, giggling. Shh! Said Harry, clapping his hand over Tristina's mouth. Here they come! Rotten little snitches, panted Crabbe, racing out into the entrance hall. Yeah, and I feel we took care of 'em all this time, panted Goyle. Ah, it ain't fair, Goyle, said Crabbe, resting his hands on his knees. Suddenly, Crabbe patted Goyle on the arm and then pointed. Cool, said Goyle, and the 2 approached the cakes. Harry and Ron smiled to each other as Crabbe and Goyle devoured the cakes, and then frowned and fell to the floor in a dead faint. How thick can you get? Asked Ron, smirking. Come on, let's get them, said Harry, and Tristina and Tanessa followed him out from behind the statue and towards Crabbe and Goyle. Soon Harry, Ron, Tristina, and Tanessa entered Moaning Myrtle's bathroom and found Hermione ladling something that looked like month-old porridge into cups. Besh was watching her do so with a rather disgusted look on his face. I think I'm glad I don't have to take that, he said to no one in particular. No one in particular thought it was very funny. Hermione gave Harry, Ron, and Tristina a cup of the Polyjuice Potion, and then said, Add the hairs. Each sprinkled the hairs of their counterparts into the cups, and then looked at each other. Cheers, said Hermione grimly, clinking her cup with Harry, Ron, and Tristina's. Tanessa and Besh watched as all 4 bent their heads back and drank deeply from their cups. I bet it can't taste very good, Besh said to Tina, who nodded in agreement. Sometimes I worry for them, you know, Besh said, when they do things like this. Once the glasses were empty, all 4 had a look of pure disgust on their faces. I think I'm going to be sick, said Ron, dropping his glass and running into one of the stalls. Me too, said Hermione, dropping hers and running into the stall beside Ron's. Tiffany? asked Tanessa, gazing at her sister. She and Besh watched Tristina double over and fall to her knees, holding her stomach. They were still watching as she started gasping in pain as if she were being lashed by a 3-headed whip, bent her back and opened her mouth as if she were going to roar, yet no sound came out. Tanessa screamed, but Besh could only watch with a sick sort of fascination. Tina stepped back as Tristina's muzzle slowly retracted into her face, and her fur began to shorten until nothing but the skin was left. Tina watched as Tiff's rear as her tail disappeared into her body. Besh watched as her large, bat-like ears shrank and moved to the sides of her head, and watched as her small black nose bubbled to the size of a human's. Her silver hair turned black, and her scars from previous lashings disappeared. Tiffany? Besh heard Harry's voice ask. He walked over and helped Tristina to her feet. Her shoes were now too small for her, and looked at her hands. The brand on her left hand was now gone, as was the white fur that covered her body. Tristina turned, and Besh saw Pansy Parkinson's reflection instead of Tiff's looking at them. I guess it worked, Besh said nonchalantly. He and Tina then watched Ron and Harry come out of their stalls, but Hermione didn't. He started to walk over and said, Hermione, are you alright?
I'm fine,
Her voice said from in the stall. Besh quirked an eyebrow. He smelled a feline. He motioned for the others, save for Tina, to go ahead, and then said, Hermione, I'm opening the stall now.
You should see her,
Moaning Myrtle said as she floated through the door of Hermione's stall. Besh frowned and pushed the door to the back of Hermione's bushy head. Hermione? He asked again.
Besh,
Hermione, what's wrong? Besh asked as he grabbed her shoulder, lightly twirled her to face him. His mouth nearly dropped. She was
a cat! I'm a cat!
She said, and started crying.
That was cat hair on Millicent Bulstrode's robes.
It'll be okay, Hermione. You just have to wait it out until the potion wears off.
I don't know if it will, though. It's meant for human transformations, which is why Tiff could do it. No, what's going on?
Tina asked, and Besh filled her in quickly. Meanwhile, Moaning Myrtle simply giggled. Besh, Tina, you guys get Hermione to the hospital wing, said Tiffany, grabbing Crabbe and Goyles with Pansy's small hands. We'll meet you there after we interview Malfoy. Pansy, Crabbe, and Goyles then hurried out of the bathroom to find the Slytherin common room. I think the Slytherin common room's this way, said Harry, pointing with one of Goyle's thick fingers. Okay, said Ron, nodding Crabbe's round head. Tiffany followed the two, rubbing Pansy Parkinson's ear, feeling slightly deaf.
Excuse me,
a sharp voice called. Pansy turned, and Tiffany saw Percy Weasley. What are you doing down here? Asked Ron, in his normal voice. Harry elbowed him with Crabbe's elbow. I mean, what are you doing down here? Asked Ron, trying to mimic Goyle's deep voice. I happen to be a school prefect, said Percy importantly. You, however, have no business wandering around at this time of night, said Percy. Harry and Ron nodded, Crabbe and Goyle's heads. You're Pansy Parkinson, said Percy, pointing to Tiffany, who nodded. But I don't remember who you two are, said Percy, to Harry and Ron in a curious voice. Crabbe, Goyle, Parkinson, where have you three been? Called a familiar, drawling voice. Tiffany had never been so happy to see Draco in her entire life. Picking out in the Great Hall all this time? Draco asked, walking up beside them. Tiffany, Harry, and Ron nodded. Why are you wearing glasses? Asked Draco curiously. Tiffany quietly pointed to her eyes behind Draco's back, and Harry took off his glasses. Surprisingly, he could see without them. Oh, reading, said Harry, putting his glasses into the pockets of Crabbe's robes. Reading? Draco asked, his face twisting in temporary curiosity. I didn't know you could read, said Draco musingly. He then led Harry, Ron, and Tiffany past Percy and towards the Slytherin common room. It took a while for Tiffany to get used to not having a tail. Malfoy flopped down on the black leather couch, and Tiffany couldn't help but stare around. Everything was black and green. Well, sit down, said Malfoy, as if he were conducting an interview. Tiffany, Harry, and Ron all sat down rather robotically. You wouldn't believe the Weasleys are purebloods, the way they behave. They're embarrassment to the Wizarding world, all of them. What's the matter with you, Goyle? Goyle's fists were clenching as he was grinding his teeth. Harry nudged him with Crabbe's arm. Stomachache, he muttered. Malfoy nodded, and then continued. I'm surprised the Daily Prophet hasn't gone reporting on these attacks. I suppose it's Dumbledore trying to hush it all up. Father said Dumbledore was the worst thing that ever happened to this place. You're wrong, shouted Harry. What? Asked Malfoy, angrily. You think there's someone here worse than Dumbledore? Goyle shifted nervously. Well, do you? He asked. Harry Potter? Offered Harry nervously. Draco stared down at him, and Harry felt Goyle's throat gulp nervously. Good one, Goyle. said Draco, looking away. "You're absolutely right." Tiffany, Harry, and Ron looked at each other in relief. "St. Potter!" Draco scoffed. "And people think he's the heir of Slytherin?"
"But you must have some idea who's behind it all?"
asked Tiffany, trying to sound like Pansy. "You know I don't, Parkinson. You heard me tell Goyle yesterday." Draco scoffed. "While we're on the subject of saints," Draco said, smirking. He then pulled out a thin gold collar with the words "Prize Slave" on it. "Father told me to slap this on Tiffany when the half-breed isn't looking. Says it'll be easier for Takama to find the bitch." Pansy's face twisted in anger. "Yo, Parkinson, you okay?" Draco asked, lifting an eyebrow.
"Yeah, must have been something I ate,"
Tiffany squeaked, trying to make her voice sound like Pansy's. "Calm down. Let's get what we came for and get out before our hour is up," Harry whispered to Tiffany. "Right," Tiffany said, trying to calm herself down by thinking of Besh.
"What about last time?" asked Tiffany to Draco. "Did your father tell you who did it?"
"No, but my father did say this. The Chamber of Secrets was opened 50 years ago. He wouldn't say who did it, only that a mudblood died. So it won't be long before one of them is killed this time. As for me, I hope it's Granger." Goyle's body shot towards Malfoy, and Crabbe and Pansy shot towards Goyle. "What's the matter with you three? You're acting very odd," said Draco, astonished.
"It's his stomach ache. Sometimes it drives people nuts, you know,"
said Tiffany, while Harry whispered to Ron to calm down. "Hey, Pansy, what's that on your hand?" asked Draco, nodding towards Pansy's hand. Justina looked down to see that a familiar black brand was appearing, and white fur was growing, thick.
"Nothing,"
stammered Tiffany nervously. "Come on, the potion's wearing off," Harry whispered, and the three ran out of the common room. Tiffany felt her tail return with a pop, and her flat mouth and nose extend into a muzzle. White fur was growing out of her body like weeds, and her black hair was turning silver once again. When they arrived back to the girls' bathroom, Tiffany, Ron, and Harry were completely back to normal.
"I don't know how you guys do it,"
Tiffany said, checking herself over in a mirror. "I felt death through that whole ordeal." Ron and Harry merely laughed as they exchanged their overgrown Slytherin robes for proper-sized Gryffindors. And that's it for part 2. Thank you all so much. I hope you guys enjoyed this iteration of a fanfiction of a fanfiction. Special, very, very, very special thank you to Besh for helping me write this story. Thank you all so much for watching. If you liked the video, please like and comment down below. I really do appreciate it. Take care of each other. God bless you all. And I'll see y'all later. I gotta give my voice a break. As much as I can, anyways.